Officer Mark Davis thought it was just another routine traffic stop, another easy shift in the quiet suburbs of Miami. He'd dealt with this countless times before. But that night, as he flipped on his lights and pulled behind a sleek black Mercedes-Benz, everything was about to change. What seemed like a normal stop would unravel his entire career in just minutes. The flashing lights behind her were nothing new to Maya Jennings, but this time she knew it was different. She wasn't just any woman on the road, she was the wife of a prominent businessman, but that wasn't what made her uneasy. What unnerved her more was the way the officer was already sizing her up, almost predatory. She slowed the car, easing it off to the side of the road in the heart of Coral Gables, a neighborhood where the wealthy and the powerful lived in sprawling mansions. The sun had just set, casting a warm orange glow over the manicured lawns and quiet streets. Maya knew this area well. It was her home. But as a woman of color in a luxury car, she also knew how this might look to an officer like Mark Davis. She could already feel the tension in the air. As she came to a complete stop, Maya's grip tightened on the steering wheel, her mind racing. She had been stopped before, many times in fact, but something about this moment felt different. With practiced calm, she reached for her phone, setting it on the passenger's seat, hit record and placed it carefully down. Not that she expected this to go viral. She had learned long ago that the only way to protect herself in situations like these was to have her own version of the story. The door to Davis's patrol car swung open. He stepped out slowly, exuding the kind of cocky authority that came from years of wearing the badge. Mark was in his mid-40s, tall, with a broad frame and an expression that seemed permanently etched into a scowl. His uniform was immaculate, his belt heavy with the tools of his trade, his badge gleaming in the fading light. His approach was deliberate, almost as if he was relishing the power he had in this moment. Maya sat still, her heart rate rising as he closed the distance between them. "License and registration," he barked as he stopped just behind her window. His voice was flat, offering no hint of friendliness. Maya didn't flinch. Her eyes, however, narrowed slightly. She'd been in situations like this before. "Can you tell me why you pulled me over?" she asked, keeping her voice steady, masking the irritation that began to bubble just beneath the surface. Davis' eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, then back to her, sizing her up. "You failed to signal on that last turn," he said, his tone dripping with disapproval. Maya's pulse quickened. She had driven this route countless times. She always signaled, and she was sure she had done so this time. "Okay," she said slowly, her voice controlled. "My license and registration are in my purse. I'm going to reach for them now." The silence that followed stretched between them like a taut wire. Davis didn't respond, but his eyes never left her face. He scanned her meticulously. From the perfect cut of her jacket, to the delicate gold bracelet on her wrist, to the way her fingers rested calmly on the wheel. He seemed to be judging her, maybe looking for something, anything, to confirm his own suspicions. "Go ahead, but make it slow," he finally muttered, his voice dripping with condescension. Maya's fingers twitched, but she held herself in check. Anger rose within her, but she suppressed it, knowing how dangerous it was to show any weakness in a situation like this. With deliberate care, she reached for her purse, pulled out the necessary documents and handed them to him, all while maintaining eye contact. Davis took them without a word, but instead of examining the papers, he stood there, his gaze fixed on her. The tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. Maya could feel the power shift as Davis watched her closely, as if daring her to react. "Do you live around here?" he asked casually, as if they were chatting over coffee at a cafe. Maya didn't miss a beat. "Yes, about 2 miles down the road," she replied, her tone still even. Davis clicked his tongue in apparent disbelief. "Really?" he asked, studying the address on her license again. "What brings you this way?" Maya almost laughed, but she stopped herself. "I wasn't aware I needed a reason to drive in my own neighborhood." Her voice carried just the right amount of defiance. Davis's smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. "Ma'am," he said, his tone changing, I'm just doing my job." Maya didn't blink. "No, you're not," she replied firmly, the words coming out like a slap in the face. The air between them shifted. Davis' shoulders stiffened, his posture now one of barely controlled aggression. His fingers twitched near his holster, and Maya could feel the temperature drop. "You should be careful with that attitude," Davis warned, his voice dropping dangerously. "You're making this a lot harder than it needs to be." Maya tilted her head slightly, her heart pounding but her face still calm. "How exactly am I making this harder?" she asked. Davis stared at her, the seconds stretching into eternity. His grip on her documents tightened, and with a scoff he turned around and started walking back toward his patrol car, still holding her paperwork. Maya took a slow breath, pressing her hands against the steering wheel to steady herself. She had been here before, too many times before, and she wasn't about to let him intimidate her now. As Davis sat back in his patrol car, Maya remained calm, her phone still recording. She knew she had to be prepared. Something told her this wasn't going to end the way she thought. It was a feeling she couldn't shake. In the silence that followed, Mark Davis stared at her license, but the doubt had already started to creep in. Why wasn't she afraid? Why wasn't she nervous like the others? She was making him uncomfortable, and he wasn't used to that. Little did he know, Maya Jennings was about to show him just how powerful a calm, controlled woman could be in the face of intimidation. This wasn't just another traffic stop. This was the beginning of something much bigger. Officer Mark Davis stood at the front of Maya Jennings' car, his fingers tapping nervously against his holster. The tension in the air was thick, and Maya could feel every inch of it. He didn't move, didn't check her license or registration right away, and for a moment she thought maybe he was trying to intimidate her into making a mistake. She kept her hands firmly on the wheel, trying to stay calm, but every fiber of her being screamed at her to be cautious. "Are you refusing to comply?" Davis' voice was colder now, edged with something that sent a shiver down her spine. His tone had changed, no longer the casual, just doing my job attitude from before, but something much more dangerous. He was now standing so close to her car she could feel the heat radiating from his body, his presence almost suffocating. The weight of the badge, the gun on his belt, everything was meant to assert control, and for a moment Maya wondered if he thought that would work on her. "Not refusing to comply," she said, her voice calm and steady, her gaze unwavering. "I'm just asking you to follow protocol." Davis paused, his jaw tightening as if her words had struck a nerve. He stepped back slightly, his gaze flicking over her once again, scrutinizing her every movement. Maya didn't move an inch, the same calm expression on her face. She wasn't about to give him the satisfaction of knowing how much this situation was affecting her. His eyes narrowed when he saw the phone still recording on the passenger seat. He clearly wasn't used to being watched, and Maya knew he was beginning to realize she wasn't just some other person he could push around. She was different. "What's the matter? You think a camera's going to stop me?" Davis sneered, as if the thought of her recording him was somehow laughable, but she wasn't laughing. Maya had seen too many videos of situations like this turning dangerous too quickly. She wasn't going to be the next statistic, not tonight, not on his watch. Maya could sense the change in his demeanor, the shift from authority to something more volatile. He was being tested, and that was something he couldn't handle. He stepped back towards his cruiser, but this time it wasn't to calm things down. No, this time he was just buying himself time, thinking over his next move. Maybe he thought he could get her to slip up. Or maybe, just maybe, he was trying to figure out who she really was. Maya wasn't done with him yet. She watched him from the rearview mirror, noting how he leaned back in his car and stared at her license. She could feel him processing the information, trying to make sense of it all. He was probably wondering why she hadn't acted the way most people did when they were pulled over, why she wasn't nervous, why she wasn't begging for mercy, why she wasn't scared. She wasn't scared, and she wasn't going to make it easy for him to make her seem like the problem here. A few moments later, he got out of his car again. This time, it wasn't with the same arrogance he had before. There was a shift in his posture, his movements slower, more deliberate. He stood by her window once again, the air between them crackling with anticipation. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there, his eyes locking with hers, the power struggle palpable. Maya didn't flinch, didn't look away. She met his stare, unwavering, her heart still steady. "You got somewhere to be?" Davis asked, his voice slick with something darker now. "Home," Maya replied, her voice even and calm, as if this was just any normal exchange. There it was again, that smirk. It crept up on his face, but this time it wasn't as confident. He had underestimated her, and now he was trying to regain control. "You don't look like someone who lives around here," Davis said, his tone tinged with disdain. He was poking at her again, trying to get a reaction, trying to force her into the role of the other, the role he had already made up in his mind. Maya exhaled through her nose, her fingers still resting lightly on the steering wheel. "And you don't look like a cop who follows protocol," she shot back, her words as sharp as the sudden silence that followed. Davis's face flickered for a split second. He didn't expect that. His smirk faltered, and for the first time that night, Maya saw a hint of uncertainty in his eyes. He was rattled, and it showed. He recovered quickly, though, brushing off her words with a scoff, but she knew it had hit a nerve. She had pushed him, tested him. She had put him in a place where he wasn't used to being, second-guessing himself. But that wasn't enough for Maya. Not yet. "I don't know how long you think you're going to keep playing this game," Davis said, his voice growing harder. "I'm not letting you walk away from this." Maya tilted her head slightly, her expression still as calm as ever. She could see it in his eyes, the shift from anger to something more dangerous. This wasn't about the traffic stop anymore. It wasn't about following the law. It was about control. And Davis wasn't going to let go without a fight. "I've given you every chance to de-escalate this," Maya said quietly, her voice firm, "but you chose not to take it." The words hung in the air for a moment, and then, almost on instinct, Davis moved. He turned his back to her and started walking back to his cruiser. Maya took a slow breath, the silence pressing in on her as she remained frozen, every muscle in her body taut with awareness. She wasn't done yet. She wasn't going to let him think he had the upper hand. She knew it wasn't over. And as she glanced at her phone once more, making sure the recording was still running, she had a sinking feeling she was about to need it. Davis wasn't finished, not by a long shot. As Officer Mark Davis took a slow step toward Maya Jennings' car, the tension in the air felt almost unbearable. The street was quieter than usual, the faint hum of distant traffic mixing with the soft rustling of the trees. It was as if the entire neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting for what was going to happen next. The flashing lights of his patrol car bathed Maya's Mercedes in a cold, harsh glow, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch for miles. But Maya, her gaze unwavering, sat still behind the wheel. There was no fear in her eyes, only calm confidence, something that unnerved Davis even more. Davis had already tried to regain control once, but this time he was determined to finish what he had started. He was done playing nice, done trying to pretend that everything was normal. Maya had tested him, and now it was his turn to test her. The power dynamic had shifted, and it was his job to get it back under his command. He approached her window again, his steps slower this time, more deliberate. His hand hovered near his holster, as if the mere thought of it would make her submit. "Step out of the car," he said, his voice much firmer now, laced with something darker. There was no pretense of politeness left. This wasn't just about the traffic stop anymore. Davis could feel that this was something else. His hand twitched as he moved closer, a new edge to his tone. "You're not going anywhere until I say so." Maya's heart began to race, but she didn't show it. Her fingers tightened around the steering wheel, but her face remained calm, as though she was in complete control of the situation. She wasn't about to let him dictate her actions. "I'm sorry, officer," she replied evenly, her voice laced with just the right amount of tension. "But on what grounds do you want me to step out of the car? I haven't done anything wrong." Davis paused, the words hanging in the air for a moment. He wasn't expecting her to challenge him like this. Most people, when faced with authority, would have folded by now, would have given in to the pressure, the need to comply. But Maya wasn't most people. She was calm, unshaken, and it only seemed to fuel his anger. "You've been acting like you're above me," Davis said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous level. "That's enough." Maya's pulse quickened, but she refused to let it show. She'd been in situations like this before. Never this bad, of course, but she had dealt with enough officers, enough men who thought they could control the situation just because they wore a badge. She wasn't going to let him do it again. "I've done nothing wrong," she said, keeping her tone level but firm, "and you have no right to order me out of my car." The silence stretched on, and Davis' expression shifted. His hands were now clenched at his sides, his eyes fixed on Maya's face. For a second, he looked as though he was calculating his next move. The tension between them was thick, the air charged with the promise of something escalating. Then, without warning, he reached for the door handle. Maya's heart skipped a beat, her muscles tensing in anticipation, but just before his fingers could touch it, she did something unexpected. With a sharp motion, Maya locked the doors. The click of the lock echoed in the quiet of the night. Davis froze. His hand hovered just inches from the door, and for the first time that evening a flicker of doubt crossed his face. Maya didn't look scared. She didn't even look particularly angry. She simply looked in control, and that more than anything else made him pause. His hand fell to his side, and for a moment the two of them just stood there in silence. Maya stared at him, her eyes never leaving his, her expression calm but unwavering. "Is this really how you want to play this?" Davis finally asked, his voice barely more than a growl. "You're going to make this difficult?" Maya tilted her head slightly as if considering his words. She could feel her pulse quicken, but she refused to let it affect her. This wasn't just about a traffic stop. This was about something deeper, something much more dangerous. He was trying to provoke her, trying to get her to react, and that was the last thing she was going to do. "I'm not the one making this difficult," she said coolly. "You are." That was the last straw for Davis. His hand moved toward his belt, and without thinking he unlatched his holster, his fingers wrapping around the grip of his gun. The air seemed to freeze for a moment as he pulled it out, aiming it at Maya through the window. Everything seemed to move in slow motion. Maya's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the gun, its cold metal gleaming in the dim light. For a split second her mind raced, but then, just as quickly as it had come, the fear vanished. She knew exactly what was happening now. This was no longer about the traffic stop. It was about power. And Davis, despite everything, was losing control. She didn't flinch. She didn't scream. She simply stared at him, her eyes unwavering. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life," she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. Davis's fingers tightened around the gun's grip, but something in his face faltered. His breathing became shallow, his confidence evaporating as the reality of what he had done began to settle in. The gun was still pointed at Maya, but it wasn't as steady as it had been moments ago. His hand shook ever so slightly. Maya kept her eyes locked on his. She wasn't backing down, not now, not ever. The street around them was completely still now, the tension so thick that it seemed to hang in the air like smoke. A few neighbors had started to step outside, phones in hand, watching the scene unfold with wide eyes. One man across the street had already started filming. Maya noticed him, and without breaking her gaze from Davis, she shifted her attention to the phone recording her every move. "Badge number," Maya said, her voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Davis' face turned pale as he hesitated for the first time that night. He was no longer in control of the situation, and the crowd was watching. Maya's pulse remained steady as she let her words hang in the air, the weight of what she had said sinking in. For the first time, Davis looked unsure. And that uncertainty? That was the moment Maya knew she had won. The standoff between Officer Mark Davis and Maya Jennings had reached its boiling point. His gun was still drawn, pointed at her through the window, his fingers twitching on the trigger. For a moment everything around them seemed to freeze. The street, once quiet and peaceful, was now filled with the electric tension of a confrontation that had spiraled far beyond a simple traffic stop. Neighbors had gathered outside their homes, phones raised, capturing every moment. The sound of a camera clicking echoed in the background, but it wasn't enough to break the silence that had descended upon them. Maya didn't flinch. Her expression was calm, her body still, like a statue of resolve. She wasn't going to give Davis the satisfaction of seeing her rattle. She could feel the weight of the gun on her, the dangerous shift in the air, but she refused to show fear. Fear was exactly what he wanted. He wanted her to cower, to back down. But Maya wasn't about to give him that. Not now, not ever. She was stronger than that. The standoff stretched on, long enough for Maya to hear her own heartbeat in her ears. She could feel her pulse, steady and sure, as if it was the only thing in the world that mattered. And then, through the tension, a new voice cut through the stillness. "Officer Davis, stand down." It was a voice that carried authority, sharp and commanding. Maya's eyes flicked briefly to the side as she saw another officer approaching from behind Davis, a man in uniform, tall and broad-shouldered, with an air of confidence and control that immediately contrasted with Davis's fraying demeanor. It was Sergeant Raymond Briggs, Davis's commanding officer, the very man who was now stepping into the situation with the weight of responsibility on his shoulders. Davis froze at the sound of his name, his fingers still gripping the gun. His body tensed, and for a split second, Maya saw the vulnerability in his eyes, the brief flicker of hesitation that was quickly buried beneath the walls he had built around himself. But it was too late. The damage was done. Everyone watching could see it. The man who had once held all the power was now standing at the brink of losing everything. Briggs stepped forward, his voice stern, unwavering. "Lower your weapon, now." The command was clear, sharp, and unyielding. Davis didn't move at first. His eyes darted between Maya, who was still staring at him with cold defiance, and Briggs, who was now standing just a few feet behind him. The seconds dragged on as the crowd held its breath, waiting for the next move. Davis' fingers twitched on the grip of his gun, the weight of the situation bearing down on him. He could feel his control slipping, his pride unraveling in front of an audience. The power he had always wielded, unstoppable, unquestioned, was now slipping through his fingers like sand, and for the first time he was truly aware of it. "Do you really want to escalate this further?" Briggs asked, his voice low but filled with authority. He wasn't asking Davis to explain himself, but to acknowledge the gravity of what was happening. Davis's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. He knew deep down that Briggs was right. This wasn't just about a traffic violation anymore. This was a crisis of his own making, a crisis he had pushed into motion with his own hands. Briggs took another step forward, his eyes locked on Davis, unblinking. "You're done, Mark," he said, his words heavy with finality. "Holster your weapon." The words were like a slap in the face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Davis' shoulders sagged slightly. He wasn't going to win this one. He wasn't going to walk away unscathed. There was no way out now, not with all these eyes on him, not with the entire neighborhood watching. The realization hit him hard, like a punch to the gut. Davis hesitated, his body frozen in place as the weight of his decision bore down on him. His fingers still hovered near his gun, but the resolve that had once fueled his confidence was gone. There was no denying it. He had lost control. He had made the wrong call, and now he had to pay the price. With a grunt, Davis slowly lowered the gun, the metal of the weapon sliding back into its holster with a sharp metallic click. The crowd let out a collective sigh of relief, the tension in the air dissipating like a thunderstorm finally passing. But the damage was already done. The moment would linger in the minds of everyone who had witnessed it. They had seen the raw display of power and the moment when that power crumbled. They had seen the downfall of a man who thought his badge made him untouchable. But Maya wasn't done yet. As the gun was holstered, she turned her attention back to Davis, her eyes unwavering. She wasn't interested in apologies. She wasn't interested in his excuses. The damage had already been done, and she wasn't going to let it slide. "Give me my license and registration," Maya said firmly, her voice cutting through the moment. She wasn't asking for his permission, she was taking control. And Davis, now deflated and defeated, reached into his chest pocket and pulled out the documents, tossing them onto her dashboard as if they were nothing more than trash. Maya took them without a word, her fingers brushing against the paper, steady and calm. She didn't flinch when she saw Davis's shaking hands, didn't comment on the fear that was now evident in his posture. There was no need to. He knew what he had done, and so did everyone else. Briggs turned his attention to Maya, his face softened in apology, though he knew it was small comfort. "Ma'am, I'm sorry this happened. It should never have gone this far." Maya met his gaze, her expression unreadable. She nodded slowly, her heart still racing, but she wasn't going to let herself get swept up in the emotion of it all. There was still work to be done. "I want to file a formal complaint," Maya said, her voice steady but firm. "This isn't just about me. This is about making sure it doesn't happen again." Briggs nodded without hesitation, his face grim. "We'll take it from here." The crowd around them started to disperse slowly, the weight of the moment still hanging in the air. But Maya stood tall, her resolve unwavering. She had faced down the barrel of a gun, and she had come out on top. As Davis walked away, his shoulders slumped and his head bowed in shame. Maya knew that this wasn't just about her. This was about accountability, about making sure that no one was ever allowed to abuse their power again. By the time Maya reached home, her phone was buzzing nonstop. Messages, calls, and alerts from journalists poured in, the video of the incident already spreading like wildfire. But Maya wasn't interested in the attention. She was interested in justice. And as she sat in the quiet of her home, she knew that this was only the beginning. The fight for accountability had just started, and Maya Jennings was ready to see it through. The next morning, Maya Jennings woke up to an entirely different world. What had started as a simple traffic stop had now turned into a national story. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages from reporters, friends, and colleagues. News outlets across the country were covering the footage, and the video of Officer Mark Davis pulling a gun on her, unprovoked, in the middle of an ordinary neighborhood, had gone viral. The clip was being shared, dissected, and debated in living rooms, boardrooms, and newsrooms all over America. The situation she'd been forced into had become the focal point of a conversation much larger than she could have imagined. Maya's husband, Ethan Jennings, a respected businessman in Miami, had already heard the news before she even picked up her phone. His voice, usually calm and controlled, had carried an edge of worry when he called her earlier that morning. "Maya," he said, "are you okay?" "I'm seeing it everywhere." She had reassured him, told him she was fine, that she was shaken but still standing strong. But the reality was different. The weight of the incident was settling in. Maya wasn't just a victim in this story. She had become a symbol of something much larger. In a way, she had unknowingly become a face of resistance. And, as the video spread, so did the calls for justice. The morning passed in a blur of interviews, phone calls, and emails. But it was a conversation with Sergeant Raymond Briggs that would stick with her. He had called her early in the day, his voice professional but full of regret. "Maya, I want to apologize again for what happened. I should have been there sooner. It should never have gotten this far." Maya's response was calm but firm. "It's not enough to apologize, Sergeant. It's not just about what happened that night. It's about accountability. It's about ensuring that something like this doesn't happen again. I'm not going to let this slide." Briggs, to his credit, didn't flinch. He agreed with her, and the conversation quickly shifted to next steps. Maya made it clear that she wanted formal charges filed, the police department would be under review, and Davis would be investigated for his actions. Briggs assured her that the internal affairs process had already begun. "We're doing the right thing here, Maya, and I'm with you on this." But even as she made those decisions, Maya couldn't escape the emotional toll. Every time she opened her phone, there was another notification. Another news outlet had picked up the story. Maya Jennings, wife of the Miami businessman, had stood her ground against an officer who had abused his power. It was a story that captured the collective frustration of so many people. It wasn't just about her. It wasn't just about a cop making a mistake. This was a story about a system that allowed abuse of power to thrive unchecked. A system that needed to be called out. Maya knew this would be a long battle. She wasn't naive. But the outpouring of support she received from across the country told her she wasn't alone. People were rallying behind her, standing with her in solidarity, sharing their own stories of mistreatment. She knew that the fight for justice was just beginning. The support wasn't just from strangers either. Her husband, Ethan, who had been so calm on the phone, was deeply affected. That evening, as the weight of everything finally began to settle on her, he came home, his face tight with concern. He pulled her into an embrace, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm proud of you, Maya," he said, his words sincere. "You didn't back down, and that takes strength. But please, be careful." Maya smiled softly, grateful for his support, but she knew what had to be done. She couldn't back down now. This wasn't just about her, about proving something to herself or to anyone else. It was about holding people accountable, about standing up for the others who didn't have the voice or the platform to be heard. Later that evening, she sat down, with her phone in hand, scrolling through social media as the reactions continued to flood in. She had no interest in the viral sensation her story had become. What mattered to her was the bigger picture, the change that could come from this. But the more she read, the more she understood just how far-reaching this incident had become. Videos from her confrontation with Davis were being shared by people from all walks of life. The reactions ranged from shock to anger, disbelief to outrage. But one comment in particular caught her eye. It was from an old college friend, someone who had watched her rise to success in the business world. "I've been following this whole thing, Maya. You showed strength in a way that most people could never even imagine. This is the kind of thing we need to stand up to. We need more people like you." That one comment hit her like a ton of bricks, because it wasn't just about her now. It was about everyone who had ever been mistreated, misunderstood, or intimidated by someone with more power. It was about making sure that people like Officer Davis, people who thought they could get away with abusing their position, were held accountable. It wasn't just about one officer's mistake, it was about the system that allowed it to happen in the first place. The video that had gone viral wasn't just a clip of a confrontation, it was a rallying cry for change. Maya understood that now. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every person who had ever been put in a position like this. She was fighting for accountability. As she prepared to head to the police station the next day, to ensure that Davis would be held accountable for his actions, Maya knew that she wasn't done. She had won the battle in the moment, but the war for justice was far from over. The video had become more than just a viral sensation. It had become the spark for a much-needed conversation, and Maya Jennings was at the center of it all. Her next move was clear: keep fighting, keep pushing, and never back down. As Maya Jennings sat quietly in her home that evening, her phone buzzing with messages from across the country, she realized something profound. The battle she'd been forced into wasn't just about a single moment, a single officer. It was about the power of standing firm, the importance of holding people accountable, and the strength that comes from refusing to let fear control your action. What had started as a routine traffic stop had escalated into a life-altering event, not just for Maya, but for everyone who had witnessed it. The viral video of her confrontation with Officer Mark Davis had become more than just a story. It had become a symbol a symbol of resilience, of speaking truth to power, of refusing to be intimidated or silenced. And Maya's decision to take action was just the beginning of something much bigger. This story serves as a powerful reminder that we all have a choice, to either remain silent or to use our voices to stand up for what's right. Maya chose to speak out, to hold someone accountable and to demand justice. Her courage didn't just change her life, it inspired others to take a stand as well. She wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for anyone who had ever felt powerless, anyone who had been mistreated, anyone who needed someone to speak up for them. In moments like these, it's easy to feel small, like one voice doesn't matter. But Maya proved that one voice can make a difference. One voice, when used with courage and conviction, can challenge systems, change narratives, and inspire a movement. So, what can we learn from Maya's story? The lesson is clear. Never be afraid to stand up for what's right, no matter the circumstances. When you know that you're in the right and you have the strength to speak your truth, you can change the world around you. And if you believe that accountability matters, if you believe that one person can make a difference, share this video with others. Let's keep the conversation going. If you like this video and want to see more powerful stories like this, go ahead and comment 1 below. If you feel like there's something I could improve, comment 0 and let me know how I can make the content even more engaging for you. Your feedback means everything, and together we can make these stories even more impactful. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice has power. Don't let anyone silence it.